Oh, well then guess what? I'm miking you.
Yeah.
I'm miking
You better go first, Janet.
I'm miking you.
All right, I will.
Then I'm miking you.
No, you should bite me.
Do you have a pocket by any
No,
chance?
here, just put it in here.
That goes here.
Yep.
Yeah. Well then, are you going to move away from the podium?
No,
All right, we're gonna set
I can
this
just
on
stay
the
up there, or I'll
podium,
just hold it.
okay?
Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
Make sure that's
I
on.
can-
Just make sure that's
Yeah.
on.
Oops.
Yep.
On. All right.
Right.
I shall just put it there.
Should I put your website up just for
Oh yeah, that'd be nice. Thank you for having me here. I feel really privileged to be in all of your company and sort of in awe, really. It's like being, I feel like so inadequate after Bill's talk. That I feel like I'm the kindergartner who just listened to the guy who graduated with his doctorate degree. And so anyway, Grantmakers in the Arts. We are a national association, as Fred said, of organizations, institutions who make grants to artists and arts organizations. So it's not a very old organization. It's been around since 1989. And our offices are in Seattle. Like so many small organizations, that's where the first executive director was. And they thought, oh, well, let's just keep our office in Seattle. We should probably be in Washington, D.C., because that's where most of our partners are. But we have within our membership, I like to say well, maybe I shouldn't say that because I'm being taped. So, we're like the 1%. We think of ourselves as the 1% of arts funders because there are probably 99, there are like 200, we think there are about 24,000 specific arts funders in America, institutional arts funders, grant makers, with a grant application process, blah, blah, blah. And we have about 350 members. And I can just tell you it's the right 350 members in order to keep an association going. But a lot of our work is not just to serve our members, a lot of our work is to serve philanthropy in general. And so you'll find on our website, which Bill has found for us, lots of public information. It's all public information about the research that we've done, about what our members are funding, about what the trends are. And I will say that recently, this conversation is really an important one to me. I grew up in a very, I grew up in a rural area. I come from a town of 2,000 in South Dakota, where everything, and small communities, as many of you probably know and have learned, in small communities, everyone does everything, and everyone participates in every way. And so this idea of integrating or separating was unknown to me. And then you get into the bigger world of specialists and urbanization, and you have the arts people here and these people there, and none of that has ever made sense to me. My career really started in community arts development, and that was how people can celebrate the arts where they live and no matter who they are, right? That basic concept that we're all artistic, that there's art within all of us, which is a concept that we've sort of gotten away from in this world of specializing, right? So, and for some reason the arts world really pushed, I think, by elitist organizations on the East Coast. I like to slam the East Coast as much as I can. Sorry about you people from the East Coast. That's right, we're leaving, right. But with major institutions that needed funding, that needed to be sort of that needed to be special, because they needed all of that money, and all of that is terrific and part of our American culture. But the reality is that that unless people understand that within themselves is something that they can see others do and even do better, that they can't ever appreciate the betterness, right? The excellence. And so and the arts world has fought this for a very long time, because they've tried to fight for validity. And we've talked a lot about, validity and about resonance, and artists have the stigma of being, not the person you want to be your next door neighbor, certainly not what you want your children to do, certainly, there's all of these negative connotations about being an artist. And a lot of that has come from You know, we can go into the, you know, what the Puritans brought over when they came, and utilitarianism and all of that. But this brings us back to art as utilitarianism. I think it's a really interesting where we kind of went away from. And so you have to tell me when Bill's time is to talk, because I could probably go on for days. So, so this is what's really important about the work that we're trying to do here, is to say, what is the role of the artist as citizen, as advocate, as interpreter, and as translator? And those are really critical in understanding the artist as creator and as you know, a serious, disciplined professional. And I think that we've, in our society, we've belittled that by thinking of artists in a good way who are only celebrities, right? And our argument always has to be, and we do this a lot with arts education and advocating for arts education, is that these people that you think are so fabulous didn't just spring full grown, right? They came from somewhere. They were inspired by a teacher. They took piano lessons. They took guitar lessons. They took art lessons. And to take that out of our public schools is really a crime. So Grantmakers in the arts system, I'm just going to tell you two things about, one is our focus areas and what I think the trends are happening in our field, which is, I think, very optimistic for this discussion here. Our focus areas at the organization, following what our members are most funding, are arts education, social justice, particularly racial equity at the moment, and financial health of arts organizations, of nonprofit organizations, and the funders' role in that financial health, and also support for individual artists. Now, our support for individual artist group has typically been folks who run artist residencies or give artist fellowships. And a lot of that has been pretty much for professional artists who are doing art for art's sake. So we're moving them, and they're moving themselves, into a greater realm of artists who are serving and interpreting in communities, right? So this is a really good sign. We're doing a lot of work right now with the health community, with the community that is supporting aging Americans, older Americans, and the fact that our baby boomers don't want to retire into the same kind of situation. So there's huge opportunity for artists to say, oh my gosh, you know, people want to play the violin again. They played when they were in high school, now they want to play again. Or they want to sing in a choir, they want to write a play, or they want to make a movie, or they want to do, you know, I mean, we're not our grandparents' and parents' generation of retirees. So there's huge opportunity there. And there's a huge opportunity now we're moving into the environment. And we are just in the process right now of doing our very first survey of our members and their funding of the environment. So, and artists in the environment. So we'll have that report out this fall by the time we have our conference. It's not going to be big. I can tell you the numbers of our members who are funding in that area are probably on maybe if we get into two hands, it would be good. But everybody is interested, and we're finding that we're in a position where we push and pull. We take recommendations from our members about what they're doing, but we're also in a leadership role. I feel like we're in a leadership role to say, hello, people, pay attention to this, because this is where artists are going. And I think the last thing I want to say is that we have, we talked a little bit about this last night. I think we've focused in the last 50 years in arts funding on institutions and building institutions, and there hasn't been enough focus on individual artists. And starting with the artist to say it's the artist who builds institutions, but primarily it's the artist that makes change in our communities. And that's how we change the stigma. That's how we change the message, is by focusing on that person, not an institution and a building that, you know, gobbles up all the money in your town that has to do with art. Not except for this one. But that it begins with the artist and who that artist is and what they can contribute. So I'm honored to be here, and hopefully we can carry on this conversation for years to come. Thanks.
Come on, right over here.
Oh. oh yeah,
Do you
sorry.
need me to have that on, or is this
Yes,
mic?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, this is for the video.
Yes.
So put this in your pocket somewhere. It's yeah, exactly.
While I'm doing this, I'll just mention, I was thinking as you were saying you're from a rural area or a small town. I grew up on a farm in Iowa, and my brother who's at the USDA would call it a small, diversified, family-owned farm, which there's not as many of even in Iowa anymore. But as I've done this art science stuff, I've begun to realize that if we broke a disc, we'd get the welder out and we'd fix it. We would build a fence, and if we didn't build it right, we'd have to build it again the next year. A lot of animal husbandry went on. We focused a lot on the ecosystem of our hilly land so that we didn't lose the nutrients of the soil. Our mom sent us to piano lessons. We were all in drama. So in other words, I grew up in a very steamy Maker Faire. I am going to very quickly go through what I was asked to cover, which is how are the arts funded at the NEA. It's actually a very short, simple, somewhat disappointing story. But it has potential, and what I want to save a little bit of time for is how can you guys help us improve that story. So basically, to seek a grant from the NEA, you can go to arts.gov, hit grants, apply for a grant. Grants for organizations, because we don't fund individual artists. We only fund nonprofit organizations. That's why there's too many of them probably in our sector. And the arts works, this is the major funding mechanism, artworks. We have 13 different disciplines in here. Theater, musical theater, dance, opera. There's also research now, arts learning, etc. You go in here, and it'll give you the guidelines, and it's basically there's two guidelines or two deadlines per year. One's coming up in July, the other one is in March. Generally, we are project focused. We don't fund general operating. We don't fund capital campaigns. So we do fund frog biologists who happen to be in a project that's some nonprofit arts organization, although they're not just arts organizations anymore. We've been funding lots of unusual people lately, especially in the STEAM kinds of things. The window of the calendar is a little bit slow. This July deadline can fund a project that can start next June. It has to come to panel. There's that whole process. You could typically think of our funding as going to places like the Mark Taper Forum, the Kennedy Center, Jeffrey Ballet. I think for the first 25 years of the NEA, it was really focused on trying to elevate the very best of the best. The next section, this was covered in a great keynote last year at GIA with Stephen Tepper. The next 20 years or so was focusing on accessibility or access, a sense of who gets to participate in this public funding. It shouldn't just be New York and LA, it should also be other geographic and ethnic participants. And now it's really shifting towards impact, and I think that opens up an interesting opportunity for you guys. And that's, I'm going to segue here. This really, I think, I'm echoing back some things that we talked about more than once today, but I think in terms of the context of how this could work better for us, there is a lot of will at the National Science Foundation, at the NEA. We have a working group that we've been meeting with, trying to figure out how we can co-fund things that are happening at the intersections. I think there's a lot of potential for this to be embraced both above us in the appropriations arenas and, I don't want to say below us, but to the constituencies, the public that we're serving. But that really is going to center around a good narrative that creates resonance, has empathy. And I'm just going to give you a very quick version of one that's working really well for us right now. One of the other things that we're doing in my office is a partnership with the Department of Defense. I mentioned it a little earlier, but I just wanted to give you some images. We have service members who have been struggling with PTS and TBI for in many cases 20 years or so, stuck, not getting anywhere further. So they are chosen to participate in this 4-week, it's sort of like an advanced laboratory for healing, hope, and discovery, how they can push the needle forward on how to treat this stuff. To hear, I'm directly quoting the command of the National Intrepid Center of Excellence. That's the building that this goes on. It's very integrative care, patient-centered. And they have learned over the last 4 years that in order for this patient-centered integrative model to really work at its best, they have to take the arts interventions from the fringe and put it right in the center. And this shows you why. This is what this guy's been trying to say to everybody who's been trying to treat him for 10 years. And he makes a mask of it. Now he can describe it to himself. It makes, just to kind of echo you, it makes visible the invisible. You can see each one of these guys are dealing with their own sense of, of what their challenges are. This is, this one I remember this guy. This comes up not just in the masks. They also do, they sit together and they write stories about things that are, weighing on their mind. Sometimes it's very aspirational things. Sometimes it's very positive. I got 1 minute left. Oh my God. But this gives you a sense of, on the one hand, he feels very strongly about a sense of service. But when he comes home, he's damaged. The people around him don't really understand what that service meant. And that's a spiritual wound for him. And what I want to get to is, in this setting, what we found is that the art helps to illuminate the research object for this person, for his own self-efficacy, and for everybody else who's trying to figure out how can my speech therapy, how can my psychiatry, how can my occupation therapy be better informed by this. And I think that's in some ways, if you can find where those resonating stories are coming up out of these research, where are we actually resonating and learning and not just communicating after the fact, but advancing our wisdom together in ways that we can't in isolation of one another. And I'll just end with, we're going to be releasing next month a report from a convening that we co-hosted with the Santa Fe Institute last summer. It was a complex systems look at the nature of creativity in the brain. So we had evolutionary biologists, neurologists, surgeons, neuroeducators. We should have had about half of the room here. 2 really good artists, Doug Aiken and Polly Carl, really convening around this. And it was very interesting to watch them unpack this. The psychologists who had been studying this for years and saying that they have a general definition of what creativity is, that they have to have one, so that they have boundary conditions that they can pursue something and be able to validate it. That's the scientific method. And it's in the definition isn't really pinned down, but it has something to do with novelty, a novel way of bringing problem solving in a way that ends up being useful. The artists heard that and were like, well, yeah, it's not really what I'm doing. I'm inventing new languages to invent a specific problem that I isolated that I think is worth us coming to confront or to reckon with. Or I am trying to use this story as a way to bring deeper resonance in who we are in our place in the world. That's what's motivating me. And I think that's where you get this sense of one of the ways that creativity works is, I think somebody mentioned it earlier, it's sort of combining convergent and divergent thinking. And in some ways you can think that the scientific method and the artistic process as being those 2 things. And the aha moment may be a way that happens in a person, in a moment. Maybe we could build a table like this and like we did at Santa Fe where we're bringing those 2 types of convergent and divergent thinking to address a certain problem or issue. Maybe we need to really focus on what is the problem we're trying to solve here. Maybe it's what is our story that will resonate across other places, because this story has completely changed our story on the Hill. I think it's saved our appropriations conversation this year. The president came out with his request and right out of the gate said, we commend the NEA for its work in the healing arts for service members, and then it goes into all the other stuff. The House came back and basically did not, for the first time, and they're Republicans, they didn't suggest a cut, and they said, we commend the NEA for its, echoing basically the president's OMB budget. So the NEA is bringing the president and the House together. Who would have thought? And so I think that's, how can you think about your story that resonates so strongly and deeply with you and that will resonate out to other places? That will give us, I think the traction to be able to build policy with the wind blowing behind the sail of it so that it can endure and be healthy.